Here's the truth I didn't expect to tell you tonight. The past doesn't always stay where you left it. Sometimes it shows up on your doorstep in the form of someone you thought you'd never see again. Someone tied to a life you've carefully folded and put away. That's how Michael appeared. He wasn't my ex. He was my ex's friend, and he came back with a story I couldn't resist. What he carried wasn't just words. It was a key to rooms in my heart I thought I'd locked for good. Before I begin, I'd love for you to share with me where you're watching this from. Which city are you in tonight? Is it a small town where everybody still waves when you walk down the street? Or maybe a big city where lights burn late into the night? Tell me in the comments. I love knowing the places these stories travel to. I like to picture someone in Chicago listening with a cup of coffee, or someone in Savannah sitting out on the porch, or maybe you in Phoenix, where the sunset turns the sky orange and purple. Wherever you are, this is my story, and tonight I'll take you into a part of my life I didn't expect to open again. It started on a rainy afternoon. I was in the middle of cleaning out an old drawer that never really gets organized, the kind filled with odd things you can't bring yourself to throw away. Old birthday cards, a broken watch, and a camera that still had an unfinished roll of film inside. The rain outside softened the world, turning the street into silver ribbons, the sound of it steady against the windows. That's when the doorbell rang. At first, I thought it was just a delivery. But when I opened the door, there he was, Michael. I recognized him instantly, though time had left its gentle traces on him. He had more silver at his temples, a steadier presence in his shoulders, and a warmth in his eyes that hadn't dimmed. It had been years, 7, maybe 8, since we'd last spoken. He'd been one of Daniel's closest friends, and when Daniel and I divorced, those friendships naturally drifted too. People don't always know how to balance between the pieces after something like that. But now here Michael was, standing at my door in the rain, with that familiar messenger bag slung across his shoulder. "Lily," he said, his voice carrying both surprise and certainty, as if saying my name was a piece of news he'd been holding on to. "Hello." "Michael," I answered, the word falling out of me in both shock and recognition. For a second, I wasn't sure whether to laugh, cry, or close the door. Instead, I stepped back and said, "This is a surprise. Come in." We stood in my entryway for a moment, the quiet hum of rain filling the space between us. My cat appeared, circling Michael's feet as if to decide whether to accept him. He smiled at that, and in the small, ordinary moment, something softened. I led him into the living room and made tea, because tea, at least for me, is the language of steadiness. He sat by the window, watching the raindrops collect on the glass. His presence didn't feel like a storm entering my life. It felt like the weather shifting, noticeable, significant, but not frightening. He rested the messenger bag by his chair, and when he finally spoke, his voice was gentle. "I saw Daniel," he said. My heart jolted at that name, even after all these years. Not with longing, but with the weight of a chapter I'd worked hard to close. I kept my hands steady on the teacup. "Where?" I asked, my voice cautious. "At a diner off Route 6. Middle of nowhere, really. We hadn't planned it. He was just there, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee. We only talked for a little while, but he asked about you. He said something I thought you deserved to hear, even if he couldn't say it himself." I stayed quiet, letting the rain speak for me. Part of me wanted to know. Part of me wanted to stay safely in the life I had now, where old wounds stayed closed. But I nodded for him to go on. Michael hesitated, as if measuring his words. He told me he still carries a memory of you. Something small, but it's kept him company all these years. A postcard you wrote on that road trip you two took together. the one with the cow fields and the broken tire. I let out a laugh I didn't expect. The one where he forgot the jack. Yes, I remember. The sky was unbelievable that day. He kept the postcard, Michael said, leaning forward. On the back, you'd written a line about how the morning air smelled like lemons and campfire. He said he reads that line sometimes when he needs to remember what hope feels like. My throat tightened. It didn't make me want him back. Not Daniel, not that life, but it touched something I hadn't felt in years. A kind of validation that even in our brokenness, there had been beauty worth remembering. Michael reached for his bag, unbuckled it slowly, and set a small wooden box on the table between us. He gave me this. Asked me to pass it on, said you'd know what to do with it. I looked at the box, hesitant to touch it. My voice came out softer than I intended. Why did you agree to bring it? Michael leaned back, considering. Because I thought you deserved the choice. And because I missed our talks, yours and mine. Back when you and Daniel were still together, I always felt like you and I could talk about things most people overlooked. He was right. I remembered late-night conversations in the kitchen, not about love or marriage, but about small truths. Why shadows in old houses always feel alive. Why music sounds different when you're driving with the windows down. We had always been able to talk without pretenses. That memory opened up a door inside me I hadn't touched in years. I untied the twine around the box, slowly. Inside were pieces of a life I'd long set aside. The postcard, a Polaroid of us at a county fair where I was caught mid-laugh, and a folded piece of paper with a list of ordinary things. Make soup, call Aunt Joan, change porch light. Nothing dramatic, just traces of a shared life. I held those items like someone holding a fragile bird, unsure whether to let it fly or keep it safe. It's strange, I whispered. These aren't love letters. They're scraps. But they feel more real than the big things we argued about. Michael nodded. Sometimes it's the scraps that hold the weight. They're the proof of ordinary love. For a while, we just sat there, the silence not heavy but alive. He asked me what I'd been doing. I told him about painting again. Little canvases, nothing grand, just still lifes of fruit and afternoon light. He asked to see one. I brought him a small painting of Piers, and he studied it carefully. You caught the bruise, he said softly. That's the part I like. The bruise isn't a flaw. It's the sweetest part. Something in me loosened at that, laughter bubbling out before I could stop it. And in that moment, I realized this visit wasn't just about Daniel. It was about Michael, too. About us sitting here, two people who had both lived long enough to understand that the deepest stories aren't always loud. The rain eased, the sky clearing just enough to invite us outside. Do you want to walk? He asked, not assuming, just offering. I nodded. And so we did, strolling down streets glistening from the rain, talking about small things, songbirds, old bookstores, the way neighborhoods change and stay the same. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't meant to be. It was simply two people remembering how to listen, how to see, how to be present without expectation. When we reached the library, he stopped beneath the old oak tree. There's one more thing Daniel asked me to tell you, he said. He said you taught him the difference between leaving and arriving. That even when things ended, you arrived in your own life as if it mattered. And he wanted to thank you for that. I let the words sink in, a bittersweet warmth filling me. That was the hardest part, I admitted. Arriving in my own life again. We walked back slowly, the streetlights flickering on, and when we reached my porch, Michael paused, handing me his number written on the back of a receipt. No pressure, he said. But I'd like to keep talking. to tell you my stories and maybe hear more of yours." I took the paper, feeling the quiet steadiness in his eyes. "I'd like that too." When he left, the house felt fuller, like it was carrying the echo of our conversation. I set the box on the table and sat with it, not needing to open it again just yet. Instead, I brewed another cup of tea, let the soft night settle in, and thought about how sometimes the past doesn't come back to haunt you. Sometimes it comes back to hand you pieces you didn't know you still needed. And that night, with the window cracked open and the cool air brushing against my cheek, I realized something simple. The story wasn't about Daniel anymore. It was about me. And maybe, just maybe, it was about Michael too. I woke with that gentle, restless feeling that comes when sleep has done its tidy work, but the heart is still sorting papers. The wooden box sat where I had left it, centered on the coffee table like a quiet guest with excellent manners. Morning light softened the edges of everything. The armchair where last night's sweater slouched, the curling fern at the window, even the small scuff on the floorboard I keep meaning to oil. I made coffee and stood at the sink, listening to the neighborhood exhale. Somewhere a truck coughed to life. 2 houses down, a dog announced a squirrel's crimes. The world was ordinary again, and yet it wasn't. It felt like a door I had not noticed was now unlocked. My phone buzzed. "Good morning, Lily. If you're open to it, I'd like to show you that something I mentioned. Nothing heavy. Just a place that explains why I've been driving so much." 11? I said yes before my cautious voice could hold a committee meeting about it. I put on jeans, a soft shirt, and a light jacket I trusted to remember how to be useful. When Michael pulled up, I noticed the same small things I'd always have. He doesn't honk. He texts here when you're ready, and then he waits. He stands like someone who remembers his height can take up space, so he tucks it in a little. We exchanged a good morning that felt like a promise to be gentle with the day. We took the scenic road out of town, the one stitched with meadows that this time of year carry a quiet gold at their seams. The conversation unfolded in small, honest pieces. He asked how I slept. I admitted I'd left the window open and listened to the maple whisper like an old friend. He told me he'd made coffee in a thermos, not because he was sure we'd need it, but because every time he forgets one, he wishes he hadn't. We passed the lake I used to visit in the years I was learning how to be alone without feeling lonely. The water mirrored a sky so clear it looked recently ironed. Near the far shore, an old train depot sat like a red brick memory. Michael turned toward it. "This is it," he said. "You'll see." The depot had been turned into a community space. Inside, the air smelled like wood and dust and lemon oil, the second chance perfume of old buildings with new jobs. The high windows let in slanted light. Tables were set up in a wide room, and on them lay dozens of small objects arranged in careful clusters. A cracked teacup with a faded rose, a harmonica with a dent like a dimple, a bundle of postcards tied with string, a child's wool cap, mended, a radio dial plate the size of a saucer, a church program with a pressed violet inside. Beside each item lay a card with a name and a few handwritten lines. I stopped at the teacup. The card read, "Ruth's teacup, first morning after the war." She said it tasted like peace. My throat tightened, the way it does when a stranger's memory reaches across the room and takes your hand without asking for anything. "What is this?" I asked. Michael's voice found that low, steady register I had started to associate with truth. I call it the small return. After my sister's husband died, she kept finding little things around the house that carried more weight than she could stand on her own. She said returning a few to people who would understand helped her breathe. I started noticing how many of us are walking around with small archives in our pockets. I began asking. People handed me objects and stories, or sometimes just stories, and I drove them where they needed to go. Sometimes I just sit with them here before they find their next home. You've been traveling to return stories, I said. And to collect them, he added. With permission. It's not a museum. It's more like a bridge. Some objects go back to a family member who didn't know they existed. Some get documented and then released. Some stay for a month so the town can visit them and remember that our lives are sewn together with threads we almost never name. He gestured to a shadow box on the wall. That spool of thread belonged to a dressmaker who taught half the neighborhood to hem their lives together after the factory closed. Her granddaughter brought it. She said it belonged in a room where hands still work. I wandered slowly, letting the room tell itself. An old bus driver's union pin with a note that said, "I kept this in my pocket the day I retired and didn't tell anyone I cried at the light on 14th. A recipe card with water stains and a margin scribble. Add salt when the pot forgives you." A little brass key with no home and a card that admitted as much and still loved it. Michael introduced me to a woman arranging photographs on a freestanding panel. "This is Norma," he said. "She is the soul of the depot and knows where everything is, including the coldest spot in the room and who took the Allen wrench." Norma shook my hand with both of hers. "We're in the business of careful handling," she said. "Michael tells me you paint. We could use a painter's eye. These labels are crooked, and I'm pretending not to see it." We spent the next hour in quiet industry. I repinned cards, straightened frames, adjusted the angle of a lamp until the glass glare softened. Michael climbed a small ladder to hang a photo of two young men at a service station, one holding up a wrench like a trophy. A boy of about 12 filtered in with a shoebox. Michael crouched to meet his gaze. "You want to place it yourself?" The boy nodded and opened the lid. Inside lay a pocket knife, its wood handle polished by use and time. "My granddad's," the boy said. "He used it to cut twine and oranges. And he used it to open the mail when the letters felt too much like news. He wants it to sit near the radio, if that's okay." He liked the radio a lot. We made a space for the knife, and the boy wrote his card in careful block letters. For a while we stood around the shoebox like it was a campfire, warming our hands at it. This is the thing about small objects. They insist on the scale that makes us human. They ask us to bend close and listen. When the room felt ready to receive whoever might wander in later, Michael led me down a short hall to a smaller room. A workbench held a disassembled radio, its guts like a city map. On the shelf above, a few old radios sat looking handsome and sheepish. "My dad and I rebuilt one of these when I was a kid," he said. He was an electrician. Quiet man. He told me you can learn most of what you need from a circuit if you follow the path patiently and don't pretend you know where it ends. I forgot that for a long time. I started remembering again here. He reached for a notebook and handed it to me. Inside were pages of careful notes, sketches of objects, snatches of people's words. Halfway through, a page stopped me. "Lily, lemons and campfire, Route 6, a door opens to air." He saw me seeing it and didn't look away. "I wrote that the day Daniel gave me the box," he said. "I didn't know if I would bring it to you, but I knew that line belonged here, where people remember that ordinary mornings can save a life." I closed the notebook with my hand resting on it a moment longer than usual. It felt less like being looked at and more like being met. We walked outside to the platform where the trains used to breathe. The old rails still ran like a promise you can't cash anymore, but don't want to forget. The sky had whitened to a soft high noon. He poured coffee from the thermos, and we sat on the steps with our cups warming our fingers. "I should tell you something before this day gets bigger than we are," I said. "People will have opinions. About us. About you being Daniel's friend. About me choosing anything that looks like moving on in a direction they didn't script. He nodded. I spoke to him again, you know. Not at the diner. A call. I said I'd like to bring you the box. I told him I won't betray him. He said the only betrayal is pretending you're not alive. He said to tell you he hopes you make art out of whatever comes next. I'm not asking for a decision. I just want to be here and honest. The relief that rose in me surprised me with its clean taste. Thank you, I said, both for calling him and for telling me. The last thing I want is a secret that grows teeth. We spent the rest of the afternoon in a rhythm I'd forgotten I loved. Do a little work, talk a little, be quiet a lot. I straightened labels, and he rewired a stubborn radio dial. We ate sandwiches Norma produced as if by magic, and listened to the depot breathe around us. A man in his 70s came in with a harmonica and tried the room's acoustics in a shy, hopeful riff that made the hair on my arms stand up. He left the harmonica on the table with a note for the next person who thinks they're not musical. Try. Evening slipped toward us with that soft, amber patience that good endings have. Michael locked up, and we drove back the long way, where the road runs a little higher, and the trees let you peek at the horizon. We didn't talk about the future as if it were a contract. We talked about dinner like two people who know feeding the body is one of the oldest ways to be kind. At my place, I sautéed onions while he sliced tomatoes with the concentration of someone who understands sharp things ask for respect. We ate at the small table by the window, and if the scene looked ordinary from the street, that's because it was. Ordinary is where most miracles prefer to sit. After dishes, we moved to the living room, and I brought the wooden box forward. I want to do something with this, I said. Not to rewrite anything. To return it to motion. Would the small return accept a loan? The postcard could sit beside a painting of mine, if I can get the color of that old sky right. The label could read, "A morning that taught two people how to breathe in separate years." He smiled in that way that makes you feel your idea arrived before you did. It would be an honor, he said. Only if you want to. Only at your pace. We took everything out of the box and made 3 little islands on the table. Keep, lend, let go. The Polaroid went to keep. The list with make soup and call Aunt Joan went to lend, because a list is a kind of portrait I wouldn't mind strangers seeing. The postcard, after a long time cradled in my hands, went to lend as well. Let go stayed empty for a while. Then I added the worn twine that had wrapped the box. It seemed right that some things retire after finishing their job. I set up a small canvas and sketched a soft horizon line while we talked in that low-tone evenings prefer. He told me the real reason he started driving farther than he needed to. When his brother-in-law died, Michael had tried to outrun his grief by taking longer jobs, by fixing things that weren't broken, by filling space with the hum of tires. One day, at a rest stop in Kansas, he found a wallet with a single photograph inside. A young woman in a checkered dress, mid-twirl. No money, no ID, just the photograph and a little note that said, "First dance after the harvest." He stood there and understood his own life like a map. All this moving, and none of it arrival. He mailed the photo back to the lost and found address on the note and took a smaller road home. That was the first return. I told him about the first painting I made after the divorce. How I had set up my easel in the kitchen because I was afraid the room would feel too big. How I painted an onion like it was a cathedral. How the smell made me cry because it was both sharp and sweet. How, when I was done, I didn't hate the way the light fell on the cutting board. It felt like a permission slip signed by my own hand. When the sketch felt right, I set the canvas aside. We grew quiet, the kind of quiet that is not absence but presence without furniture. Michael looked at me as if waiting for a cue I hadn't decided to give. He didn't reach for my hand. He asked if he could. "Yes," I said, and we sat like that, hand in hand, not to declare anything grand, but to honor the evening that had carried us here without hurry. His hand was warm. Mine was steady. The room held the soft sound of the clock I forget to notice most days. Eventually, he stood to go. On the porch, the night had pulled its cardigan on. Crickets rehearsed a steady hymn. He paused one step below me, so our eyes met level, as if someone had choreographed kindness. "May I say something that risks saying too much?" he asked. "You can. If what grows between us stays small for a long time, I'll count that as right. I don't need speed. I need true." "Me too," I said. "I'm not running. I'm not hiding. I'm arriving, one light at a time." He nodded, relief and something like gratitude moving through his face. He squeezed my hand and let it go. We didn't kiss. Not because there wasn't space for it, but because the space we had made was already enough. He walked to his car, and I stood there until the taillights performed their small ceremony at the corner and were gone. Inside, the house felt different in that impossible-to-name way that means you have told it a new story. I packed the postcard and the list into a protective sleeve, labeled them with neat letters, and set them near the door for tomorrow. The canvas on the easel wore the faint lines of a sky I once drove under. I would build its colors in layers. A little lemon at the edge, a campfire ember washed cool, and then warmed again, a long, breathing blue. I washed the mugs, turned off the lamp by the couch, and left the light over the stove glowing like the softest lighthouse. I thought of the depot and its quiet congregation of objects, of Norma's steady hands, of the boy with the knife and his granddad's twine and oranges. I thought of Daniel, not with ache, but with a kind of respectful distance, a thank you folded into a goodbye. Mostly I thought of Michael's notebook with my line inside it, not as a trophy or a token, but as a breadcrumb in a forest that had once felt too dark. Now the path seemed less like a test and more like a walk I could take at my own pace. Before bed, I opened the window a crack to let in the honest night air. I stood there and tried to name the feeling in my chest. It wasn't rescue. It wasn't a rekindling of an old fire. It was a small, sturdy flame in a new lantern, bright enough to see the next few steps. That is all any of us need most nights. Enough light to move forward without tripping on what we've already set down. If you're listening, wherever you are, know this. Sometimes life returns to you in the shape of a person who remembers how you take your tea, who asks before they enter a room inside you, who believes the smallest objects can hold the heaviest truths. When that happens, you don't have to rush to give it a name. You can let it sit beside you, like a wooden box on a coffee table, full of ordinary things that chose you once and are choosing you again, gently, differently, right on time.